Welcome back to Tom's Datsun Garage. If this is your first time viewing our channel, welcome. And I strongly recommend you go back through my older videos. That way you have a very comprehensive idea on how exactly we've arrived at this point. But today is a very special day because we're finally going to go over in detail the 1972 Datsun 240Z parts car that I recently acquired. So let's get into it. Alright, on the surface, as a whole, it looks like a fairly complete car and doesn't look to be in terrible shape. You don't really see a lot of rust down on the bottoms of the fenders, the doors. You do see some on the rocker areas like the dog legs, and you can see some filler up here where there was rust in the wheel arches. Super common for the 240Z so far, nothing really out of the ordinary. There is some buckling of the lower quarter panel back here. I have no idea what happened there, but that looks pretty ugly. And you think, man, why would you want to tear this car apart? Why don't you just throw a tag on it, maybe put it back together a little bit and throw a couple of seats in it and drive it? Well, starting from the inside, the dash is just sitting in there. And it was out of the car, and the steering column itself was too. They're being held in by just a couple bolts, but they're not even the right bolts that are holding it back together, I don't think. They were just bolts that were grabbed from different bags just to piece it back together. It's not to say that those correct bolts are missing. They might still be with the car. Here on the floor, you can see a quick patch repair was done. That's a piece of sheet steel, galvanized steel, put down, held in place with screws and a bead of caulking around it. This is kind of a common repair with 240Zs that haven't been restored because it's labor intensive to replace a floor pan, and it's pretty easy just to do something like that. My 73 had fiberglass floors that eventually shattered out of it, but that's a story for another day. Here you can see there's a hole in the floor here, and the floorboard's kind of raised in this area right here. Something underneath the car. This car had gone over something and pushed the floor up in spots. So it must have hit something pretty hard, or gone up over a curb or something like that. And on the passenger side, I'm going to take you over here and give you a good detailed look at this side of the floor as well. Over here you can see another rusty spot, crack / rust hole in the floor. Again, nothing uncommon. A little bit of fiberglass repair here. Nothing uncommon. More pinholes in the floor. And more holes in the floor. So far, this is fairly standard for a 240Z that I've seen. That's why they sell floor pans. However, everything looks fairly standard so far for a car of this vintage and of fairly hard use. But here's where things start to get really ugly. And this is why the car is not a great candidate for restoration. You can kind of see some red-orange right there on the firewall. You can see a hard line cut right into it right here. This is very poor welds. This is from another car. All the way up. That is all from another car. An orange car. A 70 through 72, I'm gonna guess, 240Z. But it gets even worse. As we come along the passenger side, more of the same. A little bit of rust Down in the dog leg areas, up over the wheel arches. Pretty standard fare. This area is very clean, although I will say there's a lot of filler in here. Usually there's rust around this area, but it's fairly clean for a 240Z. The bottom over here doesn't look too terrible. But now I'm going to start showing you where it gets even worse than what you just saw. Let's take a look inside. As you can see here on the back part of the spare tire well, this car had been rear-ended fairly significantly. That's a very hard portion of the car to distort because of the curvature of the metal. So it took quite a hard hit. Hard enough where they felt the need to replace the taillight panel with the same red-orange car parts as the passenger front. You can see the bodged welds, some of the weld wire still there in the hole. They cut it off and then welded it back together. And this area here is all kinds of wrinkled and bent downward. So this car took quite a hit in the rear and apparently in the passenger front. Let's bring you underneath the car for a better look. Here you got a pretty good idea on the taillight panel area, the lower valance. It's not even really connected to the body anymore at all. It's just kind of floating. It's not even welded to it anymore. And you can still see some of the orange paint on the end here. So because the taillight panel is orange and the passenger side inner floorboard area is orange, it leads me to believe that the car that was taken apart to make this car back into one piece from the wreck is from a 1970 through 1973. And I say this because the taillight panels were pretty much exactly the same between those years. So that's why I believe the orange car parts came out of a different 70 through 73 240Z. But I'm about to show you something even crazier under the hood. You can see the car itself appears to be fairly okay. Some oddities that you may have picked out earlier is the 260Z front bumper. Kind of weird. Most people don't forward date a Z car. They'll usually backdate it. In other words, they'll take a 280Z and put a 240Z front bumper and grille and taillight panels in it to make it appear like a 240Z. I've never seen one go the other direction. I feel like this was done out of some sort of necessity, maybe lack of parts availability or something like that. This is a very old repair. Same goes for the orange parts that were pieced into this car. But here's what's bizarre. So we have a 260Z front grille, a 260Z front bumper, 260Z lower valance, and you'll notice green paint on the 260Z parts. So if you're keeping track, there's an orange car and at least a green 260Z parts car so far that were used to put this car back together from some pretty bad wrecks. Now, let's get into the really good scary stuff. I'm going to get the hood open and propped open and show you the rest of it. All right, here we are with the hood open, and you can see the horns are mounted up high. This was done probably because of the way the bumpers are on 260Zs. And how do you get a 260Z front bumper to bolt to a 240Z? You replace the entire front section of the car. The whole radiator support, you replace it with a 260Z one. That's how. So somebody had very poorly cut the car. You can kind of see where they cut right through here and pieced in the front section of a 260Z. It's an early 260Z, early 74. You can tell by the bumper sizes. The later ones looked more like a 280Z. But here's where things get even stranger. If you look over here on this side of the core support, you can actually see orange again. Here's a little bit of body filler and green. From about here, the entire side of this car and right down through this seam here is from that orange 240Z. You see the orange paint flaking through. That is incredible. So this car is actually 3 different cars. It's a Kilimanjaro white 1972 240Z with an orange 70 through 72 240Z, rear valance, taillight panel, and entire right front section. And the fender, hood, core support, headlight buckets, bumper, grille, and lower valance of an early 260Z. Whew. But it doesn't stop there. I want to show you just a couple more things under the car, and then that'll conclude going over this particular parts car. All right, on this side of the engine bay, I was looking at the engine numbers, and I am very much of the mind that this engine started life in this car. And I say that because of the number versus the number on my engine block in my 71. This one got higher digits, but because this car was built 3 months after my car, I kind of believe it. Now, I unfortunately can't confirm it because these screws here on the passenger side fender tower or shock tower, strut tower, is long gone. This would have been, in this spot here, would have been a metal identification plate, which would have the stamping of the VIN of the car as well as the engine number stamping on it. And unfortunately, that's long gone. And I believe that left when this fender tower / whole side of the front of the car here was replaced with this one out of a 72. Well, I don't know. I'm going to say 70 through 72 shock tower. Presumably a 73 would be about the same. So I am of the mind that this is the original engine to the car. So the stamping on the firewall, the dash, and the VIN plate all match. The plate that was supposed to be here is gone, and the numbers are different on the engine. Now, what I speculate is this car had been wrecked twice. I speculate early enough in its life that the car had been severely crunched on this side for whatever reason, it either spun around or got rear-ended really hard, and they took an orange car and pieced it into this car and set it free. And then at some other point, the front end must have gotten hit on this side, and they pieced in the 260Z parts later. That's my speculation. So, very interesting. Now, I'm going to go ahead and show you the inner fender liner. You can kind of see the orange paint all through there. From the car that was pieced in from. And then it turns green right there from the 260Z parts. And then underneath the car, you can see where they overlap the panels and welded them together. And you can see the welds were not exactly great. Some frame rust. And the floorboards on this side are wrinkled up as well from going up over a curb or something. So they were damaged as well. So the floors are wrinkled pretty good, damaged pretty good. And here you can see that there's some white paint right there. So that tells us that this is the original frame rail, but you can see where it's torn right through here. And you can see where it was cut right there to add on the 260Z parts. This is pretty scary. Pretty scary. You can see body panels opening up and rusting through. So there you have it. Now you all know why this is more or less an ideal parts car. And that's everything. I hope you guys have a much better understanding on why this is an ideal parts car and not necessarily a good candidate for a restoration. That's not to say that it couldn't be done with enough time and money. It absolutely could. But it doesn't make sense monetarily from a certain standpoint. So it's kind of a shame, but hopefully with enough pieces off of this car, other 240Zs will be able to live on. I appreciate each and every one of you who've watched my videos and who's subscribing and commenting on the videos as well. It really makes me feel good to see that people are starting to watch the channel a little more, and I really appreciate each and every one of you for tuning in. I will be probably a little more interesting once I finally get the hardware back from this car after everything's been plated, or at least enough of it to where I can start to really order some parts and get rolling on Project Z again. That's all I have for you this week. We hope to see you again with another video, hopefully sooner than later. What I'm going to try to do is probably try to set up something where I can do a time-lapse video of me taking this car apart. That was suggested by a couple of viewers, so I figured I would learn the camera settings a little better and try to figure out how to do that. So at least you'll have some idea of this car coming apart, maybe a quick overview of just me taking it apart. It's kind of a boring, tedious process disassembling a car, but I guess some of you are interested in that, so I'll just do a time lapse of that. But then I don't think I'll have anything really coming up to feature until I get the parts all for plating and start ordering the parts for the Project Z. As always, thank you very much for watching. I really appreciate each and every one of you. We'll see you on the next video.